Morning, everyone. And Guacheng reminded me that it's a national day today. So congratulations. Another year of Singapore's existence. And maybe the end of our class today, we can dedicate all the merit to continued good health, prosperity, good government, happiness, peace in Singapore and everywhere in the world. Okay, so we're now doing the fifth talk in this series of talks on the subject of mind training or thought training. Specifically, we're looking at a text which is called the 7-point mind training. It's a very kind of ancient text in the Tibetan tradition, written by Geshe Chekawa. So we're going through this text and looking at what it's teaching us and doing some meditation on it. So it's got 7 points, and the first of the 7 points was preliminaries. So there we looked at some basic topics that we need to think about and reflect on to turn our mind to the Dharma, to realize the importance of learning the Dharma and practicing the Dharma. So those topics are 4. The preciousness of the human life that we have, and then death and impermanence, the fact that our life isn't going to last forever, it's going to end at some point, and so we really need to use our life well and wisely, not waste our time or use our life in meaningless ways or harmful ways. And prepare for death, at least spend some of our time preparing ourselves for the end of our life and then the transition from this life to the next one. And then the third topic is karma, where we look at how our actions are the cause of our own experiences in the future. So good actions lead to happiness, negative actions lead to suffering. So if we want happiness and we don't want suffering, we really need to watch our karma. Try to create as much good karma as we can and refrain from negative karma. Oh, and Guacheng, did you receive that file that I sent? Somebody was interested in this file about the 10 non-virtuous actions. So I mentioned that there was a file. So I sent that to Guacheng, and I think it should be available on the ABC website at some point. And then the fourth of the preliminaries is the problems of samsara, the suffering nature of samsara or cyclic existence. And so there we look at how our situation, as long as we're unenlightened beings, as long as we haven't become Buddhas, we haven't attained liberation, nirvana, but we're still just ordinary beings in samsara, then we have all kinds of problems. That's just the very nature of samsara. So these are actually huge topics on their own. We didn't, go through them in much detail, but in the Lam Rim teachings, hopefully you have the chance to learn the Lam Rim, study the Lam Rim, meditate on the Lam Rim. There you can go into these topics in much greater detail and depth. And they're very, very important because they really help us to, like I say, see the importance of learning the Dharma and practicing the Dharma, spending at least some of our time in our life in doing this. So that was the first point. Then the second of the 7 points is bodhicitta. So this is the aspiration to become a fully enlightened being, a Buddha, to be able to help all living beings. So we started on that topic, I think 2 weeks ago, and we looked at one method for cultivating bodhicitta, which is called equalizing and exchanging self and others. And that has like 5 different points that you meditate on. And by meditating on those points, your mind transforms. You become more and more concerned about others, have more and more love and compassion for others, and eventually get to the point where you feel, I must become enlightened. I want to reach the state of enlightenment, just like the Buddha did, so that I can help all sentient beings. And the fifth point of this 5-point method for developing bodhicitta is tonglen, taking and giving. And so last week, we did a meditation on the giving part of that practice of tonglen. So we meditated on a practice in one of Lama Tsong Khapa books, imagining your body, the elements, the 4 elements of the body, earth, water, fire, and wind or air, absorbing into the external elements, and then those transforming into whatever sentient beings need to be happy. So satisfying the needs and the wishes of sentient beings, bringing them happiness. So today, I thought we could start our class by doing a meditation on taking, the second part of giving and taking. So giving is giving happiness to others. Taking is taking away their suffering, taking their suffering onto ourselves and using it to overcome our self-centered attitude, which is kind of deep in our heart, in our mind, and very much part of our life, where we feel I, me, I am the most important person in the world, and everything revolves around me, and our actions, our decisions, our thoughts, and so on are all involved with me. So that attitude, everybody has it, it's normal, but it's a big obstacle to the bodhisattva's path, developing bodhicitta and reaching enlightenment. So that's like one of the big things that prevents us from progressing on the path. So we need to overcome that. And the giving and taking meditation is a very good antidote to that. So yeah, taking involves imagining that we take the suffering of others and use it to overcome or destroy our self-centered attitude. But I thought we would, as the book advises us, the text, the 7-point mind training text says we should start by taking on our own suffering. So I'll lead a meditation on doing that, but I just want to give a bit of explanation to remind you about the background of this practice, why it's beneficial to do. So this can help us get into a good state of mind, good motivation for doing this practice. So just naturally, as ordinary people, ordinary beings, our wish is to have good experiences all the time, to always be happy. We want everything to go well in our lives. So when we think about the future, the future can mean today, tomorrow, next week, the coming months and years and so forth. Most probably we dream of pleasant things happening to us, and we don't think about unpleasant things happening to us, like getting sick, getting cancer, or getting into a car crash. Although that's not completely true, because we do sometimes have fears and worries, and our mind will come up with these worst case scenarios where we imagine terrible things happening to us. Or terrible things happening to our family members, our loved ones, and so on. So we sometimes have thoughts like that. But then when we think about those kind of things, we feel, oh, no, I don't want that to happen to me. That would be terrible if that happens to me. I hope that doesn't happen to me. And instead, we just want good things, pleasant things to happen to us. So this is normal. And it's actually nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be happy, with wanting to have good experiences, and wanting to avoid bad experiences. But then, is it realistic to have this attitude that only good things should happen to me and no bad things should happen to me? Is that realistic? So if you think back to like Chinese New Year, which was in January, not so long ago, you were probably caught up in plans for gatherings with your family and friends, preparing food and gifts, getting new clothes, sending good wishes to everybody for the new year, hoping that it will bring good things, good health, good luck, prosperity, and so on. So back there at that time, we probably nobody had any idea about what was going to happen this year. You know, the coronavirus, suddenly taking off and spreading all over the world, and thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people getting infected and many dying as well. Right? So we didn't expect this to happen. And then all the other things that happen as a result of that, like people losing jobs, and having to close down their businesses, at least temporarily, and having to stay home in lockdown. So probably most people in the world have felt really shocked about what has happened in our world. But for those of us who've studied Buddhism and have a Buddhist view of things, these things are not really surprising, because we know that we're in samsara, cyclic existence, and the nature of samsara is that there are problems, dukkha, suffering, happening again and again to everyone, to all people, all beings, except, of course, Buddhas and arhats, those who have attained nirvana and enlightenment, who are beyond samsara, so they don't have any more suffering. But those of us who are still in samsara, who haven't achieved those states, it's just normal that we run into problems. So some people think the Buddhist view of things is pessimistic, talking so much about suffering and problems. But it's actually realistic. It's really the reality of things. So people everywhere in the world try so hard to set up ideal situations, like the perfect relationship, the perfect family, the perfect business, work environment, the perfect government to take care of the country, the perfect healthcare system, and so on. But no matter how hard we try to make things perfect, ideal, problem-free, it's actually impossible, because there will always be problems, always things that go wrong. So why is this? So according to Buddhism, it's because we have within us, in our minds, the causes of suffering, the causes of problems. They're with us all the time, as long as we're in samsara. And these causes are afflictive emotions, like greed, hatred, ignorance, jealousy, arrogance, and so on. And also karma, the imprints of actions that we did in the past. So these are the causes of suffering. And as long as we have these in our mind, as long as we haven't freed our minds from these causes of suffering, then wherever we go, whatever we do, there will always be problems. That's just the nature of samsara. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try to make things go well. We should try to have a good government, a good healthcare system, good family, good relationships, and so on. We try our best to do these things. But we just need to keep in mind that, however hard we try, we can't completely avoid problems as long as we're in samsara. So that's why Buddhism says we need to see samsara for what it is, as in the nature of suffering, dukkha, and become disillusioned by it, disenchanted with samsara, and then generate the strong wish to be free, to free ourselves from samsara, and then put as much energy as we can into what we have to do to become free, the methods for attaining liberation, and better still, attaining enlightenment, full enlightenment, Buddhahood, so that we can help others be free of samsara as well. And this practice of Tonglen is one of the best practices we can do that creates the cause for enlightenment, helps us to get closer to enlightenment. So that's the reason for doing this practice. And so let's have that as our motivation, thinking we're doing this practice in order to create the causes to become enlightened, free of all suffering and its causes, and free even of the obscurations that prevent enlightenment. And we're doing that, reaching enlightenment, so that we can help all other living beings become free from suffering as well. Okay, so I thought that I'll lead this practice based on the practice explained by Lama Tsong Khapa in one of his books called Heart Advice for the Dying. So I've made a few changes to it to fit with the thought training text, but it's basically the way that Rinpoche explains it. So get yourself into a good position for meditation. Have your back straight, and you can have your eyes closed completely or just left open a little bit. So there's some light coming in that will help you to stay awake. And it might be helpful to take a couple of deep breaths. So breathe in slowly, pause, hold your breath for a moment, then breathe out slowly. Let your breath go out slowly and steadily. Do that 3 times. This is actually a very helpful way of releasing tension and getting into a more relaxed, peaceful state of body and mind. So take 3 deep breaths and then just return to your normal rate of breathing. So begin by generating a feeling of compassion by thinking about how living beings constantly experience suffering, even though they have no wish to. Nobody wants to experience suffering, and yet people and other beings do run into suffering and problems and difficulties again and again and again. You can think specifically of people right now suffering from COVID-19, people who have loved ones suffering from it and are worried if they will survive or not, people who might be short of food, money, who might be facing other kinds of difficulties, perhaps their business closing, not being able to pay their rent on their house, and so on. Many, many people experiencing difficulties right now and really suffering. Try to really feel how wonderful it would be if this suffering could end, if they could be free of all these problems, all these difficulties, all this suffering. Also, remember that suffering has causes. The causes are karma and delusions or afflictive emotions in the mind, especially ignorance, not knowing the true nature of things. So as long as these exist in the minds of ourselves and others, then we continue experiencing problems. Again, feel how wonderful it would be if all living beings could be free of the causes of suffering, karma and delusions. And then generate great compassion by thinking, I myself will free them from all their suffering and its causes. And in order to do that, I'm going to imagine taking away the suffering from others and using it to overcome my self-cherishing attitude, my ego-centered attitude. So it's recommended that before taking on the suffering of others, we start by taking on our own suffering, a suffering that we will experience in the future. Well, we don't know exactly what's going to happen to us, but we can use our imagination. Or just imagine some of the problems that you might experience today, tomorrow, next week, in the coming weeks, months, years. So, for example, you might get sick, or you might get injured, and then you would experience physical discomfort or pain. You might experience frustration when things don't happen the way you want them to, or when unwanted problems, difficulties appear in your life. You might lose things that you cherish. You leave them somewhere and they disappear, or they are stolen from you, or they break down, not work anymore. You might also lose loved ones, people you know and love, people who are really important in your life. So they might go away, you have to separate from them, or they might die. And as time goes on, our body gets older, loses its youthful energy and attractiveness, gets more and more wrinkles, and gray hairs, more physical problems. So we might feel unhappy or even frightened when we think about these things, but it's not helpful to be afraid of them. We actually do have the ability to deal with these experiences skillfully, with courage and wisdom and compassion, and even make these experiences part of our spiritual practice that help us reach enlightenment. So, by getting familiar with the Dharma, practicing the Dharma as much as we can, we will develop these qualities and abilities. And in fact, the Tonglen practice is one such method. that will help us develop more courage, more ability to deal with our problems and have resilience when it comes to difficult experiences. So generate a courageous state of mind and imagine taking on all these problems, all these difficulties that will probably happen to us in the future. And also take on the causes of these problems, the karma we've created in the past and disturbing emotions in our mind. So imagine all the suffering and causes of suffering in the form of smoke or fog and take them into yourself. Imagine the smoke or fog coming in through your nostrils and going to the area of your heart chakra in the center of your chest. Imagine there is your self-centered, selfish attitude, the attitude of thinking or feeling I am more important than others, and sometimes we even feel we can harm others or use others to get what we want. So imagine the smoke or fog dissolving into the self-centered attitude and annihilating it, making it disappear, become non-existent. Selfishness is based on the ignorance that believes in a truly existent I. Even though there's no such thing, no truly existent I, but we cherish this wrong idea of an I and regard it as the most precious and most important of all beings. So imagine that your selfish attitude, the ego, and the grasping at an I become non-existent. So imagine spaciousness, clarity, light, and peace in your heart. Your mind is now free of this selfish thought, and the suffering that you breathed in also becomes non-existent. So now let's try doing this practice with others. So if you're new to the practice, if you haven't done it before, it might be best to just think of one person, someone you know and love and care about, who is suffering right now, physically or mentally or both. If you're more familiar with the practice, if you've done it before, then you might think of a group of people or a whole city or country or even all living beings. So it's up to you what you feel comfortable doing. And then contemplate the suffering of the person or persons, beings that you're imagining. Try to really get a feeling for how they are suffering and how sad it is that they are suffering, how you wish them to be free of their suffering. And generate compassion, wishing them to be free of their suffering. If it's difficult to feel it, then at least say the words. Say to yourself something like, how wonderful it would be if those people, those beings, could be free of their suffering. And also the causes of suffering. Remember, suffering is caused by disturbing emotions in the mind, greed, hatred, ignorance, and so on. And also karma left from past actions, unwise, unskillful actions. So wish them to be free of the causes of suffering as well as the suffering itself. And see if you can go one step further and wish to take the suffering away from them and take it into yourself to overcome your self-centered, selfish attitude. And as before, imagine the suffering and its causes taking the form of smoke or fog. And it comes into your nostrils, comes down to your heart, where the self-centered attitude, the ego, is based. And imagine the smoke or fog absorbing into the selfish attitude and making it non-existent. So your selfish attitude, the creator of all your problems, becomes non-existent, disappears. Your mind is now free of this selfish thought. And also the suffering that you took in from others also becomes non-existent. And at the same time that your selfish attitude becomes non-existent, the false I that ignorance believes in, that holds to be true, also becomes completely empty, as it is in reality. Meditate on this emptiness, the ultimate nature of the I, understanding there's no solid, real, independently existing, inherently existing I to be grasped at, to be held as important and dear. That's really the ultimate antidote to selfishness and to all our other afflictive emotions. Just understanding that I doesn't exist. It's not real. Again, imagine spaciousness, clarity, light, and peace in your heart. Your mind is now free of the selfish attitude and the ignorance that gives rise to it, and also the suffering that you took in also becomes non-existent. Okay, so when you're ready to come out of the meditation, you can slowly open your eyes, relax, change your position if you need to. So maybe I'll send a file containing this meditation, the complete meditation of Tonglen, taking and giving, taught by Lama Zopa Rinpoche. I'll send it to Guat Chang and she can put it up on the website if people want to have it to be able to practice on their own. It's a very powerful practice, but it's also somewhat advanced. So if you're relatively new to Buddhism and meditation, and also to the whole idea of bodhicitta, then you might find it difficult to do this practice. And there's also a simpler way of doing the practice that we can use anytime we are experiencing any kind of problem. So for example, even if you have a headache, or you're feeling a little bit achy in your body, or hungry, or thirsty, or too hot or too cold, or any kind of mental unhappiness, like feeling some hurt because of what somebody said, or feeling disappointed that things didn't turn out the way you wanted, or feeling bored, or feeling depressed. So whether it's a physical problem or it's a mental, emotional problem, any kind of problem we experience, we can do this Tonglen practice in a simple way by just reminding ourselves that we're not the only person in the world who is experiencing such a problem. There's many other people, many other beings who have the same kind of problem or something similar to it. Contemplate that and generate compassion. How wonderful it would be if all the other people, all the other beings could be free of this suffering, just like I want to be free of it. And then the next step is to mentally take on this problem, accept this problem, instead of feeling, oh, I don't like this problem, go away, leave me alone, or feeling sorry for yourself because you have it. So instead, take it on, accept it mentally, and think that by taking on this problem, may all those other people and beings be free of that problem. May they all be free of the headache or the pain or the depression or whatever it is. So once you know how to do this, you can do it in just a couple of minutes, and you don't even have to be in a meditation position in a special place. You can do it anytime, at work, while traveling, lying in bed. So anytime, just when you notice you have a problem, use that problem to do the Tonglen practice. Take on this problem for others. So it can be very, very helpful. In my experience, sometimes the problem goes away. Not always, so don't expect that to happen. But even if the problem doesn't go away, even if it's still there, your mind has changed. Your attitude has changed. You're not looking at the problem in the same way as before, with aversion, with, oh, why does this have to happen to me? I don't want this. I don't like this, trying to push it away. So instead, you're seeing it as something useful. There's something useful you can do with this problem. So you've decided to open up your heart and accept the problem instead of pushing it away. So it becomes more bearable rather than unbearable. It's bearable. So that itself is extremely helpful. Okay, so any questions you may have, we can talk about at the end. I'd like to go on with the text. So I'm going through this book, which is called Mind Training Like the Rays of the Sun, which is a commentary to the 7-point mind training. And with regard to the practice of taking, it mentions another thing we can take is problems from the environment. Just trying to find the page here. Taking away problems from the environment. So this book doesn't really explain that so much. It just says that this involves imagining all impure realms worlds, places, which are the result of karma and delusions, they are transformed into pure worlds. So that's all it says. But in Lama Zopa Rinpoche's meditation, the way he explains the meditation, he says, take from others all the undesirable environments that they experience. Okay, so we can think of places that are maybe very dry and hot, and maybe there's a famine, there isn't enough food to eat, or there isn't enough water, or there's a war, a lot of fighting and violence, and a lot of fear, everybody living in fear. And maybe there's a lot of, dirty things like garbage piling up and so on. So whatever kind of unpleasant, difficult environments people are living in, imagine taking that in, just as before, you take it in the form of smoke or fog, and it transforms into something that overcomes your selfish attitude, your self-cherishing attitude. So we can do that with the human realm. There's plenty of unpleasant places here in the human realm. And he mentions also the other realms, like the hell realms, the hungry ghost realms, the animal realms, and so on. So it's up to you how much you're able to do this practice. But I was thinking this would be a really good practice for people concerned about the climate. I mean, we should be concerned about the climate, the problems of climate change, like all the pollution and all the plastic in the oceans that are creating a lot of problems for the wildlife, fish and birds and so on. And the fires that are destroying really precious forests, like in the Amazon and also in the Arctic Circle. So all the problems that, well, they're human created problems, unfortunately, but nevertheless, they're happening. And so you can imagine taking all those problems on, like dark smoke, fog, and so on, overcoming your self-cherishing attitude. And then it doesn't actually mention the giving part, but you can imagine sending out, purity, beautiful things, healthy environments, healthy air, clean water, the right temperature for every place, so that the glaciers and the Arctic Circle and so on are not melting and disappearing. The rain is falling in the right places at the right times and so on. So that's another way of practicing Tonglen with the environment. And it's said that doing Tonglen practice is good against disease, against sickness. And in fact, the author of this 7-point mind training text, Geshe Chekawa, long ago in Tibet, he taught the practice to some people suffering from leprosy. And when they practiced it, at least some of them were healed of their leprosy. And so he was like, wow, this is a really powerful practice, and it should be made available more widely. So that's why he wrote this text, so that more people would know about the practice of Tonglen and be able to do it and get the benefit from it. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, we should do the practice of taking and giving whenever we have a problem, whether it's AIDS, cancer, some other disease. We could add coronavirus now. Or if we have a breakdown of a relationship, failure in business, or difficulty in our spiritual practice. So anytime we face a problem, even the small one, big one, any kind of problem, we can do the Tonglen practice. He says it's a very profound and powerful practice in which we use our own pain to develop compassion for other living beings. So through this meditation, we experience our disease and other problems on behalf of all living beings. Doing the meditation well helps to stop our pain, and it's not uncommon for it to even heal disease. The main point of taking and giving, however, is that it purifies the causes of disease, which are in our mind: our ego, ignorance, self-centeredness, all of our other disturbing emotions. So that's the real point, is to overcome those. Exchanging self for others is a brave practice, and it is far more important than visualizing light coming from healing deities or any other meditation. So when I read that, I thought, well, that's really interesting. You know, we often like to do medicine Buddha practice, Tara practice, and so on when we have problems. And in those practices, we visualize these wonderful deities in front of us or above our head, and the light is coming down, flowing down, clearing away all our, sickness and our problems and our karma, purifying us, freeing us of these problems. So, of course, it's wonderful to do those practices. But he's saying doing Tonglen is more important than doing that. So I was thinking about that, and I think it's because doing those kind of practices could actually increase our self-centeredness, because we might be feeling, oh, I am such an important person. I shouldn't have to suffer. I should be free of my suffering. And I will pray to Medicine Buddha. I will pray to Tara to free me from all my suffering. I shouldn't have to suffer. So, behind that practice might be the ego, the self-centeredness. And so instead of that decreasing, it might just, remain the same, maybe even increase. Not necessarily, but it could be, I'm just saying. Whereas this Tonglen practice, it's really going against our ego and our self-centeredness, our strong sense of I, me, I am so important. That's really being challenged, being hit and overcome. Because if you think about it, our normal attitude is, and this is true for everybody in the world except for bodhisattvas, our normal attitude is, I shouldn't have to suffer. I shouldn't have to have any problems. I should only have good experiences. Only good things should happen to me. Never mind if problems happen to other people. Well, that's too bad. I'm really sorry for them, but they shouldn't happen to me. Yeah. And then happiness, when it comes to happiness and good experiences, we feel, yeah, I should have all of those things. Yeah, I know some people don't have them, but I'm really sorry about that. That's really too bad, but I should have them. So we can see how our sense of self or I is really very strong, very powerful. And this practice of Tonglen is really completely going to the opposite. It's going opposite to our usual attitude, to actually say, I will take on the suffering of others so that they don't have to suffer. I will give my own happiness and virtue and merit and all my good things to others so that they can be happy. So it's totally opposite, totally reverse to our ordinary attitudes, our ordinary way of thinking and feeling. So that's probably why Rinpoche says this is more important to do than those other practices. Not that we shouldn't do those other practices. Of course, those are good to do as well. But this is a very, very powerful practice. So he says, by taking all the suffering of others upon ourselves and giving them all our own happiness, we use our disease or whatever problem we have to generate the ultimate good heart of bodhicitta. This is the very heart of healing. Yeah. And so he says it's a really good practice to do whenever we're sick or have any other kind of problem. And even if the illness or the problem doesn't go away, it, like I said before, it helps you have a different state of mind, a different attitude about it. So I read a story about a man who had AIDS, man in New York City, and he had AIDS, and he wasn't a Buddhist, or he wasn't doing any kind of spiritual practice. But a friend of his thought it might be helpful to do the practice of Tonglen. And so he taught this practice to him, and he did the practice, and he found it so helpful because before he was experiencing a lot of suffering, and he just felt the suffering was useless. There's no use to this suffering that he was experiencing. And so when he learned the practice of Tonglen, it gave him something useful to do with his suffering. Yeah, it enabled him to see something useful with his suffering. So I don't know whether the suffering actually disappeared or not, but at least it helped him not feel so unhappy and depressed and like, going through meaningless and useless suffering. So it helps us with the mental, emotional way of looking at our suffering. So then the next line in the text, going through the 7-point mind training, says, these two should be made to ride on the breath. So somebody already asked about that last time we met, that the Tonglen practice can be done with the breath. So it said that in the beginning, when we're first learning the practice, we don't have to do it with the breath. It might be better to just do it with our visualization. But when we get more familiar with the practice, more acquainted with it, better at it, then we can combine it with our breathing, in the sense that when we're breathing in, we're taking in the suffering of others in the form of this smoke or fog, and it overcomes our self-cherishing attitude, selfish attitude. And then when we exhale, we breathe out, we send out all our good things, good fortune, our merit, our resources, and so on. And imagine this goes out to others and transforms into whatever they need to be happy. And it's good to give them not just the causes of temporal happiness. I mean, that's good to do, of course. Those who are hungry, there are people who are really hungry, really in need of food. So you can imagine sending them the food that they need to fill their tummies and make their minds happy. Give water to those who need water. Give homes to those who are homeless. Give doctors and nurses and good medical treatment to those who need that, and so on. So whatever they need, give that to them and imagine them receiving it and being happy. But beyond that, it's good to give them Dharma in whatever way is appropriate, so that they understand the need to, create good karma and avoid bad karma, and generate renunciation and generate love and compassion, and gradually attain all the realizations of the path up to enlightenment. So you can really go full on in sending out to others whatever they need all the way up to enlightenment. So some practitioners who get really, really familiar with this practice, who do it a lot, then they are able to do this all the time, even when they're going about their normal daily activities. With every breath, they're taking in the suffering of others and giving out happiness to others. So, I think you have to practice quite a bit to get to that point, but I'm sure there are some who do it. And so, we can do it even in our daily life and our daily activities. I read about one woman in America who learned the Tonglen practice, and she would use it at work when there were business meetings. She said business meetings would sometimes be kind of unpleasant. There'd be arguments and conflicts and bad feelings, bad atmosphere. And so she would sit there and just imagine taking in all the bad energy, all the negativity, all the problems, and then sending out light good thoughts, good feelings, good energy. So without anybody knowing what she was doing, she would just sit there and do that. And she said it did make a difference when she would do that. The meetings would be better, more peaceful, not so many conflicts. And one day she was walking down the hall and she happened to pass two colleagues, and they said to her, "Are you coming to the meeting?" And there was a meeting about to happen. I don't think she was planning to come to it, but so she said no. And they said, "Oh, that's too bad. When you're at the meetings, they really go better." So that shows that other people noticed it too, that when she was there and doing Tonglen practice, the meetings would go better. So that's really interesting. You could try that. Maybe now you're not having business meetings. Maybe everybody's still working from home, but next time you're at work and having to have a meeting with other people at work, you could try doing this. Also, I can't remember where I heard this, but sometime long ago, I heard about a way of doing Tonglen with the prayer of the four immeasurables. Four immeasurable thoughts. Like there's two versions of that. The short version is, may all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free of suffering, and so on. So that's the short one. There's also a longer one. So while you're reciting that prayer, you could do the Tonglen practice. So when you're saying, may all sentient beings have happiness and its causes, you can just pause and send this, positive energy from yourself to others, and imagine them receiving it and being happy. And then the next line, may all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. So then you can pause and imagine taking the suffering of others into yourself, overcoming your self-cherishing attitude, and so on. And then what's the next one? May all sentient beings not be separated from the happiness that is free of suffering. That means the happiness of upper rebirths and liberation. So you can imagine sending out light to other beings, and it helps them create the karma to have good rebirths in future lives and create the causes to attain liberation. And then the last one, may all sentient beings have equanimity, free of attachment and aversion, and so on. So then you can imagine taking in the attachment and aversion of sentient beings so that they're free of those disturbing emotions and their minds are able to be equanimous. So if you don't have a whole lot of time and you like to do the Tonglen practice, that would be one way of doing it on a daily basis. Just taking a bit longer to do that prayer, not just rushing through it, blah, 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 but, doing it slowly and combining it with Tonglen. Okay, so then the next, moving on to the next part of the text, there's 3 lines that start with concerning the 3 objects. And the outline heading in the commentary, Mind Training Like the Rays of the Sun, say, this is the practice to be followed between meditation sessions. So they often talk about meditation time and then in between meditation time. So, I mean, this is applicable in the case of people who are like doing retreat, and they have a number of meditation sessions during the day, which might last an hour or 2 hours or whatever. And then there's break times in between one session and the next. And there you might go for a walk, make yourself a cup of tea, have a meal, read a Dharma book, do other things, and so on. So this next part of the text is advice for what we should do when we're not in a formal meditation session. So for most people, that's probably most of our time in our ordinary life. The amount of time we're sitting and doing a formal meditation practice might be 1 hour at the most, or maybe even half an hour, maybe 20 minutes, whatever. But that's, a relatively short part of our day. And then the rest of our day, we're not doing formal meditation practice. But it said that we should try to keep our practice going, even when we're not in formal meditation. So when we're eating, working, talking to people, watching TV, whatever we're doing, try to keep our practice going. So the next lines of the text say, concerning the 3 objects, 3 poisons, and 3 virtues, the instruction to be followed in brief is to take these words to heart in all activities. So the first line mentions 3 objects. So the 3 objects are, they could be people or other kinds of beings, animals and so on, or they could be inanimate things like, food, clothes, just things that we see, sounds that we hear. So any kind of object that our mind perceives, contacts. Okay, so all those kind of objects can be divided into 3 groups. One group is things that we find attractive, things that we like, people or things that we like, we find them attractive. The second group are people and things we don't like, we find unattractive. And the third group are everything else, things we find neither likable nor not likable, just neutral. Like right now in front of me is a wall, a plain white wall. Okay, so I don't really like it, I don't really dislike it, it's just kind of neutral. Okay. So all objects, whatever we perceive with any of our senses, seeing visual objects, hearing sounds, smelling odors, tasting, tastes, sensations, bodily sensations, hot, cold, sharp, soft, and so on. And then those are the 5 sensory objects. And then mental objects would be things that we think about or imagine or remember. We spend a lot of time remembering, having memories of the past, or plans for the future. So all of our thoughts, those are mental objects. So all of those objects could be divided into these 3 groups. Those that we like, we find attractive. Those that we don't like, we find unattractive. And those that we are neutral to, just kind of don't like and I don't dislike. So those are the 3 objects. Things I like, things I don't like, things I'm neutral to. And then it says the 3 poisons. So you probably know what the 3 poisons are. Those are mentioned in Buddhism. We have many delusions or afflictive emotions in our mind, but there are 3 that are the main ones, the big ones, the ones that are most problematic. And they are attachment, desire, clinging, grasping. And second is anger or hatred or aversion. There's different levels of that, like just a feeling of, I don't like that, aversion, all the way to hatred or, this rage where we might even feel like doing something violent, destructive towards someone or something. So that's the second poison. And the third poison is ignorance, confusion, not seeing things realistically as they are, but seeing things in a wrong way, in a mistaken way. So there's a connection between the 3 objects and the 3 poisons, in that when we encounter attractive objects, like you see something beautiful, something pleasant, something attractive, if we're not careful, that can lead to attachment, to grasping. I want that. And when we have attachment, what happens in the mind, this isn't done consciously or deliberately, but it's just the way that our mind works. Our mind exaggerates the object, exaggerates the attractiveness of the object, making, kind of blowing it up so that it seems much more wonderful and beautiful and fantastic than it is. Yeah? And then once we've exaggerated it, we want it. And we may feel, I have to have that. If I can have that and make it part of my life, take it home, keep it with me, oh, I will be so happy. It will be so wonderful. So that's attachment. It causes us to want, to own, to possess, to have the object. And so that's unskillful, unhelpful state of mind. And then with regard to the objects we find unattractive, that we feel some dislike for, if we're not careful, that can lead to anger, hatred, and even worse than that, like wanting to do something harmful, destructive. And then for neutral objects, those that we don't like or dislike, that just perpetuates our ignorance, our confusion, because we see everything as if it has some kind of real, objective, independent existence on its own, from its own side. Like there's a real thing there, a real wall. I'm looking at a wall right now, which isn't very interesting. But nevertheless, even if I don't really like it or dislike it, I still see it as something very solid and real and independently existing. And I just take that for granted. That's how it appears to me, and that's how it exists. It's really like that. Whereas in fact, it's not like that. It's impermanent. It's made of particles. I mean, we know this from science. It's made of molecules and atoms and tinier and tinier and tinier particles. And you get down to a place where there's just these tiny particles whizzing around in a great big massive space. It's not really so solid as it appears. The solidity is like an illusion. It's not really like that. So it looks really solid and really permanent, like it's not changing, but it is changing. It's changing every single moment, every single nanosecond, and not at all as solid as it appears. So that's just one example of how we see things incorrectly, other than how they really are. And we tend to just believe in that appearance of things. Okay, so even with regard to neutral objects that we neither like nor dislike, and we don't get attached to, and we don't have aversion for, but as long as we continue seeing them in a way that isn't true, isn't how they really are, then our ignorance, our confusion is maintained and perpetuated. And that's how we are stuck in samsara. We're stuck in samsara because we see things incorrectly, as more real than they really are. And the things that we like, we get attached to. The things that we don't like, we have aversion to. And then once our mind gets caught up in these disturbing emotions, we act. Not always, but often we act. We do things, we create karma. And that's how our existence in samsara just goes on and on and on and on and on. Okay. So it says concerning the three objects, the three poisons, and the three virtues. So what are the three virtues? The three virtues are three states of mind that are opposite to the three poisons. They are non-attachment, non-hatred, and non-ignorance or non-confusion. So those are three virtuous mental factors. And so the advice here is to watch our mind, observe our mind, what's happening in our mind when we encounter objects, people, or inanimate things, any kind of object we encounter. Just be on the lookout for these dangerous states of mind we can get into: attachment to attractive things, aversion to unattractive things, and just ignorance about everything else. And at least try to stop ourselves from acting out those poisonous states of mind and creating negative karma, which will just create the cause of suffering in the future. But even if we don't act out and create negative karma, just having our mind caught up in anger or attachment or confusion, that itself is painful. That itself is disturbing. That is, an unpleasant state of mind. And so it causes us problems right now in this present life. And also making our mind more and more familiar with those poisonous states of mind, it just perpetuates our existence in samsara. So there's lots of methods, lots of antidotes we can use when these poisonous states of mind come up. For example, attachment. One of the best antidotes to attachment is impermanence, just to realize the object we're attached to is changing all the time, every minute, every second, every day. And it's not going to look like that forever. It's going to, wear down and break down and eventually be destroyed or die or disappear. So it's not capable of giving us lasting happiness. Okay, so that's a very helpful antidote to attachment. There's others as well, but you can look those up in the Lamrim. And then for anger, aversion, hatred, many, many, many antidotes. There's whole books full of methods for overcoming anger. And so we can generate loving kindness and compassion towards, it's usually people that we get angry at. Sometimes people get angry at machines, like their computer or their phone, when they don't work right. They can get angry at them and throw them against the wall. There was one guy in America a few years ago who got frustrated with his computer, and he took it out in the backyard and shot it 8 times with his gun. Well, that's not the way to fix your computer. This is what happens, our mind, when we get caught up in anger, we just become like crazy, irrational. We do crazy, stupid things that don't help, don't make things better, but just make things worse. Anyway, yeah, so if we're angry at people, then contemplating loving kindness, compassion, forgiveness, patience, those are antidotes to anger. And anger at your computer or at your phone, I don't know. Best to just realize how anger doesn't help and try to calm yourself down and put your phone aside for now and do some breathing meditation, calm down, and then call the phone company and get someone to fix your phone. Don't just throw it against the wall. Yeah. Try to restore a calm, clear, intelligent state of mind and look at the situation better. Yeah, and for ignorance, we need to learn about emptiness and get teachings on emptiness, learn about it, study it, reflect on it, discuss it with others, and meditate on it. That's the antidote for ignorance, but that's difficult. So we can start by working on the first 2, attachment and aversion. So that's in general how to deal with these 3 objects, 3 poisons, and 3 virtues, trying to change our mind from attachment, aversion, and ignorance into non-attachment, non-aversion, non-ignorance. But in this book, in The Mind Training Like the Rays of the Sun, he talks about doing this practice not only for ourselves, but for others as well. So he says we should think, By these means, I have cut off all the disturbing emotions of all the many beings overpowered by them in this world. May they thus abide in virtue and be freed from the three poisons. And we should do this practice all the time, all through the day and night. So what he's saying is, not only thinking about our own three poisons, trying to free ourselves from our three poisons, but thinking about all sentient beings and how they are caught up in these three poisons and suffer as a result of the three poisons that take over their mind and motivate their actions, cause them to create bad karma, and then they have more suffering in the future. Okay, so this is the Mahayana particular way of doing this practice, thinking about all sentient beings and wanting all of them to be free of the causes of suffering, like these three poisons. So I should probably stop here and leave you some time to ask questions, sorry. I'll answer the questions. Just one more thing I wanted to mention though, because as I was preparing for this class, I remembered a story I heard about Kirti Sancho Rinpoche. Some of you might remember him. He did come to Singapore at least once during the 90s. Wonderful, wonderful Lama. And when he was in Israel giving teachings, he was not feeling well. They took him to the hospital and they found that he had liver cancer. He was diagnosed with liver cancer. So the story that I heard was that he was in this hospital and the doctors came in to give him the diagnosis, that he had liver cancer. That must be one of the hardest things for a doctor. Yeah, can you imagine having to tell a person that they have cancer, especially really, I think it was quite a serious degree, like maybe stage 4 or something. And so if you've met Kirti Sancho Rinpoche or even seen a picture of him, he's always got this big smile on his face. He just looks blissful all the time. Big smile. So he didn't stop smiling as the doctors were giving him this diagnosis. He didn't stop smiling. And he even said, "Thank you. Thank you." He thanked the doctors for telling him that he had liver cancer. That's probably very unusual when people are given such a diagnosis. Most people are probably, shocked, and maybe they start crying, screaming, getting angry at the doctors. And then later, and the students who had invited him to Israel and so on, they were very, very worried. And when they heard the news, they were very, very upset. And he sent them a message. And he said to them, "Don't be upset. I don't want you to be upset. I don't want you to be sad. For such a long time, I have been doing this practice of Tonglen. I've been praying to take on the suffering of sentient beings. Now I have a chance to actually do it." So he wasn't unhappy or upset about having cancer. And he actually, I don't know how much after that he passed away, but apparently he was just so peaceful and so happy, and right up to the end of his life. So it just shows what's possible by familiarizing with this method for developing bodhicitta, and especially the practice of Tonglen. It really changes our mind and enables us to have this incredible courage and resilience and wisdom and compassion, even when dealing with severe forms of suffering. So I found that story very inspiring and have to share it with you. Okay, so yeah, if you have any questions, just one thing though. Last week there was a question that came up from Faye, I think. I don't know if she's here tonight. She asked a question about the practice of giving, and part of the practice was to imagine our body, or the earth element of our body, absorbing into the external earth element, and then that transforming into things that people need, such as gold and jewels, giving that to people. And she said she was concerned that if she gives gold and jewels to people, they might misuse it. So I said, well, don't think about that, just try to imagine they're using it in a good way. And then after the class, I thought another thing you could do, if that kind of concern comes up in your mind, is to imagine you're giving them the inner qualities that would enable them to use their wealth in a good way. Give them kindness and compassion and generosity and non-greed and also integrity, so that they don't do anything illegal or corrupt or selfish with the greed, with the money, with the wealth. Instead, they use it to help others. So that's something you could do. Not just give them these material things, but also give them the inner qualities, the mental qualities that would enable them to, be positive, be good, be virtuous, and do good things with their life rather than harmful things. Okay, so any other questions?
Okay, Ida has a question. Hold on.
Good evening.
Hello.
Ida, you can, did you unmute or something? Oh yeah, okay.
Good evening, Venerable. Thank you very much. I'm new to Tonglen, and I've always have to admit that when I hear the teachings of Tonglen, I look at it with a bit of apprehension. And I'm looking at the headache example that you've given, and I think that's very interesting because I used to have bad headaches and migraines and stuff like that, and it's good to think, at one time when I said, okay, I think I'll try this and take on that little bit of suffering, and so that other people don't go through this, and then I find that it intenses, I don't know whether it's all in my mind or whatever, but does it also mean that when you have such a motivation or have such thoughts, you don't take medication, or how does that work? You know what I mean?
No, it doesn't. Yeah, if you're doing Tonglen practice, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't take medication or you shouldn't go to the doctor and try to get treatment for your illness. You can do that, fine. So we do need to take care of our health and take care of our body and try to live as long as we can. But even if you take medication, it doesn't always work. And even if it does work, sometimes it takes a while. It takes time before it works. So there may be some period of time when the pain is still there, the illness is still there, right? So during that time, when you're in that state of pain or not feeling well, during that time, you could do the Tonglen practice. Imagine. Yeah, and like I say, you don't have to actually imagine taking the suffering of others, but the suffering you yourself are experiencing, like the headache, you can just say to yourself, by my experiencing this pain, this headache, may the suffering of headache of all people, all beings disappear. By me accepting this, experiencing this, may everyone else be free of that suffering. So it's just a mental thing. It's just something you're thinking, something you're saying to yourself. And I'm sorry if it makes your headache worse. I don't, like I said, there's no guarantee that doing this practice will actually make the problem disappear. It might still be there. It might even get worse. And then definitely take some medicine, some medication for it. But what it can do is just change our state of mind. Yeah, I remembered another story that I heard from Fred, who's now Venerable Drachom. But when I lived in Singapore during the 90s, we knew him as Fred. And he was in the army as a captain or major or something. And one time he was injured in a parachute jump. And he said he was in the hospital with really, really bad pain in his back. And he did the Tonglen practice. He was doing Tonglen with his pain, and it really helped. At least it helped his mind. It may not have helped the pain or helped his, injury go away, but at least it gave him, it gives you something to do with your mind instead of just, oh, this is terrible. Oh, when is this going to go away? The things that normally happen when we have pain or some kind of problem that aren't very helpful. They don't help. The Tonglen gives us something constructive to do, something useful, something virtuous. That's another thing too. When we do this practice, we are creating virtue. It's very, very virtuous, very, very meritorious. So it's like we're using a problem, a suffering, to create virtue, to create merit, to get closer to enlightenment. So try it. Maybe try it with small problems. Start with small problems, little problems.
I thought headache was a small one.
Huh?
I thought headache was a small one.
Well, maybe even smaller than that. Sure,
Yes, I think it's just changing one's mind thoughts. I think, in little steps.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, there's can you wants to ask a question? Hold on, I try to meet you. Can you? Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Venerable, for the teachings. My question is, due to the fragile economic situation, everyone may lose their job. So how can we actually adapt the Tonglen practice to prepare ourselves before the day of retrenchment come in? Or even at the time of the announcement of retrenchment, we are the one who got retrenched. And how can we actually accept that and are able to take the suffering of others? Like, for example, my colleagues is not the one impacted by me. I'm actually taking the impact. And how can we actually further develop this, to come to acceptance? I know that it's going to be very, very hard. Thank you.
So you're saying you are expecting that you might be entrenched, you might lose your job?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's like at the beginning of the meditation, we started by thinking about the suffering that we ourselves might experience. I mean, we don't really know exactly what is going to happen, but that is something that could happen, something very disappointing, very very tragic, such as losing one's job. So you can just prepare yourself, think about that might happen, and imagine now taking that suffering onto yourself, using it to overcome the self-centered attitude, the self-cherishing attitude. But you could also think of other things, like if you're worried about how you will support yourself and how you will support your family if you do lose your job, then you could think about practical solutions to that. What are some things you could do? Find another job, find some other way of supporting yourself, seek, I don't know what social welfare may be available in the country where you are, but just, don't only do Tonglen practice, but also think practically, find practical solutions. But just to prepare yourself for the emotional impact of that experience, Tonglen could be very helpful. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you, Venerable.
I hope it doesn't happen, but yeah, it's good to be prepared. I tend to think that way, I try to prepare myself for the worst case scenarios, and then if they do happen, I'm more prepared. I don't totally fall apart because I've already, prepared myself for that. I've already thought about that. So it does help. Yeah, we need to find a balance, because it's also not helpful to worry. You know, the mind that worries, oh, maybe this will happen, and if it does happen, it'll be a disaster. I won't be able to manage. You know, sometimes our mind just gets carried away with worries that don't really help. You know, that way of thinking isn't helpful. It's good to be realistic, to think, yes, that might happen. It might happen to me. It might not, but it might happen. And if it does happen, I think for me, in my experience, Dharma practice, spiritual practice, is the most beneficial thing. It really helps your mind to be strong, to have methods, tools that you can use when these kind of problems do happen in life. And also taking refuge. Don't forget that. If all else, if you can't remember any other practices, take refuge. You know, think of the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, Tara, Chenrezig, whoever you feel most connected with. Think of them, feel that they are there with you, giving you help, giving you guidance, giving you strength to be able to get through this experience. You're not alone. So there's actually lots of practices within Buddhism that can help us to stay strong, courageous, resilient when facing difficulties in life. And also, actually, the next part of the text that we will come to next week is about transforming adverse circumstances in the path. So that's all about when we do face problems and difficulties in life, how to use them as part of our practice that will actually enable us to progress along the path and get closer to enlightenment. So bad things happening are not really bad from the point of view of a Dharma practitioner, someone on the path to enlightenment. Lama Zopa Rinpoche says that, bodhisattvas, they like problems in the same way that ordinary people like ice cream. Yeah, when it's a hot day and we see an ice cream stand, oh, ice cream, I love ice cream. We really enjoy eating ice cream. But when it comes to problems, oh no, not that, I don't want that. But he says bodhisattvas, they have that attitude that we have about ice cream. When problems happen, oh boy, here's a problem. It's not because they're masochistic, but because they know that problems, difficulties in life are really valuable experiences, great opportunities for spiritual practice and spiritual growth. So we'll look at that next time. We'll start looking at those methods for how to transform difficulties.
Okay, we have Anjali on the line. There's a question. Yeah.
Thank you for your teachings, Venerable. I've only recently started doing Tonglen. One of the things is that there is a distant family member whom I'm not very close to, but who I know is suffering from cancer. And I have been specifically thinking about her and taking on the suffering of cancer onto me. My question is that, is it better or not to let the person know that we are doing this for them? Is it helpful for them to know that somebody is thinking about them? Or is it better not to let them know and just carry on with the practice? I'm not particularly close to her, but I do know she's suffering and I would like to help. So what is more beneficial?
Well, I think what I've heard is people sometimes feel very uplifted when they know that others are thinking of them, praying for them. You don't have to say you're doing Tonglen for her. Maybe she wouldn't understand that, but you're praying. You can just say, I'm praying for you, whatever that would make sense to her in her, use terminology that she would understand. I think, that might be helpful for her to know that. But in some cases, that may not be appropriate if it's somebody we don't know very well, or it's someone who might even get angry if they found out we were praying for them. Yeah, it's possible. I don't know. But in that case, we don't have to tell them. And we can still do the practice, and it can still be very beneficial. Because in that example I mentioned of the woman doing Tonglen during the business meeting, I mean, nobody knew what she was doing. And yet they still felt a result of it. They felt an effect of it. So people don't have to know you're doing a practice in order to receive benefit from it. So you can just think about her and what might be helpful for her to, in expressing it to her, because you know her maybe better than I do. Anyway, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
For doing that practice. It's really wonderful.
Next is Sui Kim. Sui Kim, you can unmute yourself.
Hi. Morning from Singapore. Very much ask. There are some advice which says that when you take on the suffering of others, you imagine that black smoke going into the left side of the nostril and destroying self-cherishing. And when you're giving out, you give out like white light and nectar through the right side of the nostril and entering those beings. So do you actually advocate that order? And is there any reason why it's left and right in that order?
Yeah, I mean, in the version of the practice from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he doesn't specify right and left. He just says, take it in through your nostrils, take the smoke in through your nostrils, and then send out the light through your nostrils. So he doesn't say right and left. I have heard it that way in some cases, but I don't know why it's in the right and out the left. There might be a reason, but it's not something that I've heard. So I guess you can maybe be free to try it in different ways. And like I say, I will send this version of Lama Zopa Rinpoche's version to Guacheng. So, or it's in the book Hard Advice for the Dying, I think. If you have that book, it's full of all these different practices for helping ourselves when we're dying, but also helping other people who are dying. So this is a practice you can do.
Okay, Faye has a question. Faye?
Hi, Venerable. Good question. The story you mentioned about the person who had cancer and then had peace with it. I missed that story. Would you mind saying it again? I'm sorry. Just
The story about Kirti Sencha Rinpoche?
No. Someone who had cancer and then found a way to get peace with it and was happy when he died.
Yeah, it was a Lama.
Oh, sorry.
Lama, Kirti Sencha Rinpoche. He's really wonderful Lama, very knowledgeable, a great meditator. He spent like 15 years in retreat above Dharamsala. And yeah, so he quite a high level practitioner. Yeah, so when he was told that he had cancer, he didn't get upset, and he was, just smiling and even thanking the doctors. And then he said to the students who were very worried about him, he said, don't worry, don't be sad, because for such a long time I have been, praying to take on the suffering of sentient beings. Now I have a chance to do that. So he saw his illness as a way of taking on the suffering of others, bearing the suffering of others for their benefit. So that gave his mind peace, and he wasn't upset as I heard it. Didn't feel upset or sad, but just saw it as an opportunity for practice, spiritual development. Yeah, so I just told that story as a way of illustrating how if we get familiar with this practice, we keep doing this practice, we can get to that point where tremendous courage and strength and resilience when it comes to facing difficulties in our life. So how about if we stop at this point?
Yeah.
Getting late for me. And you have National Day celebrations too.
Yes.
I was thinking you have fireworks at night, right?
Yeah. Just now we actually have a plane flight. Just so we actually have the plane fly past.
Oh,
So
the
some
jet.
yeah.
But I was thinking the fireworks. I always like fireworks. You can offer them, make an offering of them to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, the merit field, and all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be able to enjoy this beauty. Okay, so let's take a few minutes to dedicate the merit, the positive energy we've created during this session. So we've created a lot of merit by just thinking about and trying to do this practice of Tonglen. So let's share this merit with all living beings, all the human beings, all the beings in other realms, most of whom are really in deep suffering right now. So may this bring them peace, freedom from suffering, freedom from the causes of suffering, ignorance, greed, hatred, other delusions, karma. And may it help all of them find genuine peace and happiness, especially the causes of happiness, virtuous states of mind, virtuous actions of body, speech, and mind. And may they all generate all the qualities and realizations they need to progress along the path and reach enlightenment as quickly as possible. And in particular, may Singapore and all other countries in the world be at peace, have wise and ethical and compassionate leadership, and may all the citizens be healthy and live in harmony with each other and dedicate their lives to doing good as much as possible. Okay, thank you. Enjoy your day and see you next week.
Good night.
Good night or good morning.